Let's talk about how we can optimize our brains. When you do something deliberately, you pay attention, you are bringing your perception to an analysis of three things: duration, how long something is going to take or should be done; path, what you should be doing; and outcome. If you do something for a given length of time, what's going to happen? It's what I call DPO, duration, path, outcome, type of deliberate function in your brain and nervous system. When you engage in this duration, path, and outcome type of thinking or behavior or way of being, you start to recruit these neuromodulators that are released from particular areas of your brain, and also, it turns out, from your body, and they start cueing to your nervous system, something's different now about what I'm doing. The moment you decide to learn something, or to resist speaking, or to speak up when you would rather be quiet, anytime you're deliberately kind of forcing yourself over a threshold, you're engaging these brain circuits and these nervous system circuits. Impulsivity is a lack of top-down control, a lack of top-down processing. The other thing that will turn off the forebrain and make it harder to top-down processing is a couple of drinks containing alcohol. Well, the removal of inhibition is actually a removal of neural inhibition, of nerve cells suppressing the activity of other nerve cells. And a lot of people don't understand, or at least appreciate, that the thought patterns and the neural circuits that underlie thoughts can actually be controlled in this deliberate way. Thoughts can be both reflexive, they can just be occurring all the time, sort of like pop-up windows on a poorly filtered web browser, or they can be deliberate. We can decide to have a thought. In fact, right now you could decide to have a thought just like you would decide to write something out on a piece of paper. The brain is going through these 90-minute so-called ultradian cycles throughout the entire day and night. Every 90 minutes we shift over from being very alert to being less alert, and then back to alert again. You'd be amazed how much you can get done in 90 minutes if you are focused. There will be kind of peaks and valleys within that, but that 90 minutes is about what the brain can handle in terms of a dedicated effort for high degree of focus. I set a timer for 90 minutes, and I try and get a strong bout of work done inside of that 90 minutes with the full understanding that the entire 90 minutes is not going to be uniform in terms of my ability to focus. So the goal is to get into what I call the tunnel, to really get into a tunnel of quality work. So that means no checking the markets, no checking social media, no checking the news, no checking email, none of that. That's the mentality that I've embedded in myself, that there's nothing more important than what I'm doing in that 90-minute block. And that's what works for me. The brain loves that state, but it's very hard for many of us to access. Every cell and organ in your body needs light information. You can actually use light to wake up earlier. You have the capacity for what are called phase advances and phase delays. So that's something you could try. You could put your lights on a timer to go on early in the day before you wake up. You could open your blinds so that sunlight is coming through. The most powerful thing that's governing when you want to be asleep and when you want to be awake is light. And in particular, it's governed by sunlight. Now, I can't emphasize enough how important and how actionable this relationship is between light and when you want to sleep. The period that we call sleep and the period we call wakefulness are tethered to one another. What we do in the waking state determines when we fall asleep, how quickly we fall asleep, whether or not we stay asleep, and how we feel when we wake up the next day. If you want to become an early riser, for instance, and you want to feel more awake during the early part of the day, by getting that light exposure and exercising early in the day, you will, after 2 or 3 days, you will naturally start to wake up earlier in the day. And that's because these clock mechanisms have shifted. It's like setting the clock earlier. By viewing sunlight at that time of day in the evening or afternoon, depending on what time of year it is and where you are in the world, these melanopsin cells, these neurons in your eye, signal the central circadian clock that it's the end of the day. If you want to do this through a window at work, that's fine, but it'll take 50 times longer. So the best thing to do is just to get outside for a few minutes, anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes, also in the afternoon. Having those two signals arriving to your central clock, that your body, your internal world knows when it's morning and knows when it's evening, is tremendously powerful. It's a training mechanism by which you self-train your nervous system to go from a state of heightened alertness that you don't want to heightened relaxation that you do want. And so it's really teaching you to hit the brake. A couple of things for optimizing workspace that are grounded in neuroscience and physiology. Body posture and whether or not you're upright or reclining will impact your levels of alertness in the predictable ways. When our eyes are directed upward, it creates a state of heightened alertness. And this has a relationship to the brainstem neurons that create alertness and their control over the muscles of the eye and, believe it or not, the eyelids. The point here is that you can optimize your workstation in a physical way that leverages this aspect of the visual system and your level of alertness. Try and position your screen or your tablet, whatever device you happen to be working on, at least at eye level and ideally slightly higher. If you think about it, most people are not doing this. Most people are looking down at the their computer or tablet, that is not going to support heightened states of alertness and optimal attention. In fact, the opposite relationship between eye position and alertness is also true. When we look down, when our eyelids are slightly closed, it tends to decrease our levels of alertness and increase our levels of sleepiness. It turns out that white noise, which is essentially all frequencies of sound, mixed up kind of randomly, there's no structure to it, turned on at a low volume, not with headphones most of the time, puts the brain into a state that's optimal for learning and workflow. Brain areas involved in attention, brain areas involved in focus and cognition and memory, those are engaged to a greater degree when there is low levels of white noise playing in the background. Try removing multiple sources of dopamine release, or what used to be multiple sources of dopamine release, from activities that you want to continue to enjoy or that you want to enjoy more. I can use a personal example for this. I happen to really enjoy working out. I've always really enjoyed it. But in recent years, I noticed that if I was bringing my phone to my workouts, I started to lose interest in what I was doing. It wasn't as pleasureful. As I started learning more about this relationship between the peaks and the baselines and dopamine, what I realized was that some time ago, I probably experienced an incredible increase in the amount of dopamine during one of my workouts because I enjoy working out and I enjoy listening to music. Those are all wonderful pursuits, but I had layered in too many of them too many times, and then it essentially wasn't working for me anymore. Much in the same way drug wouldn't work for somebody who takes it repeatedly because their baseline of dopamine is dropping. Addiction is a progressive narrowing of the things that bring you pleasure. Enlightenment is a progressive expansion of the things that bring you pleasure. I would imagine that being able to derive pleasure from many things would be a wonderful attribute. We know people like this that can experience pleasure in little things and in big events.